My name is Anna, and I never imagined my life would turn out like this. I used to believe in fairy tales, well, at least in the idea of finding the perfect person, someone to build a life with, to love and trust. That was Mike. He was everything I had ever dreamed of. We met in college, and it didn't take long before I knew he was the one. After graduation, we got married, and everything seemed to be falling into place. But then, it all came crashing down. Mike worked in sales, which meant frequent business trips. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was just part of his job. He'd leave for a few days, and I'd go about my routine. We'd talk on the phone every night, and I'd wait for him to come back. It wasn't ideal, but I trusted him. He always reassured me when I asked, telling me how much he loved me and how lucky he was to have me. But then, something changed. Over time, the trips grew longer, and his calls became less frequent. When we did talk, he seemed distant, distracted. I chalked it up to stress or exhaustion from his job, but a nagging feeling started to settle in the pit of my stomach. I ignored it for months, convincing myself it was just my imagination. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. One evening, after a particularly strange phone call, I decided I couldn't ignore it anymore. Mike had promised to be home that night, but he was hours late. I called his cell, but it went straight to voicemail. I waited. And waited. But still, no word. At midnight, my phone rang. It was Mike. "Hey, babe," he said, his voice sounding unusually flat. "I'm really sorry, but I won't be able to make it home tonight. Something came up." I tried to hide the frustration in my voice. Something came up? Again? I know. I'll explain when I get back, he said quickly. Just don't worry about it, okay? But I couldn't stop worrying. Something wasn't right, and I was done pretending like it was. I couldn't keep lying to myself. So, I did something I never thought I would, something I hated myself for doing. I went through his things. It was a small, stupid thing, really. His phone was lying on the kitchen counter, and I just picked it up. His password was easy to guess, something I had seen him type in 1,000 times. My hands were shaking, but I did it anyway. What I found made my heart stop. There were text messages, countless messages from a woman I didn't recognize. The messages were innocent enough at first, just casual chats about work, but then they started to get personal. Flirty, even. My stomach churned as I scrolled down, each message more intimate than the last. I read them all, my heart breaking with each word. It wasn't just an affair. It was an emotional betrayal, a complete disregard for everything we had built together. I confronted him the next day. He didn't deny it. "I didn't want to hurt you," he said, his eyes avoiding mine. "I didn't know how to tell you." I was shaking with anger. "How could you do this to me, Mike? How long has this been going on?" "It started a while ago," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was lonely, Anna. I thought you didn't need me anymore. And she was there." "Don't you dare blame me for this," I snapped, tears stinging my eyes. "This is on you. You lied to me for months. You're not the man I thought you were." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine regret in his eyes. But it didn't matter anymore. I was done. "I can't do this anymore," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I don't know who you are anymore." I packed a bag and left the house that night. Mike tried to stop me, but I couldn't stay. Not in that house, not with him. The days that followed were a blur of pain and disbelief. I stayed with a friend for a while, trying to process everything. But nothing made sense. My entire world had been a lie. And the worst part was, I didn't know who to blame more, Mike for betraying me, or myself for ignoring all the signs. I eventually moved out of the city and started over in a small town. It was a fresh start, a chance to heal. But the scars didn't fade easily. It took time. And though the pain has softened, it's still there, lingering beneath the surface. Mike has tried reaching out, apologizing, begging for another chance. But I've learned that some things can never be fixed. Some betrayals are too deep, too damaging. And now, as I look back, I know one thing for sure: I will never let anyone have that kind of power over me again. I am stronger now, and though my heart still aches from the loss, I know I'm capable of moving forward. The first few months after I left were the hardest. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my chest tight with anxiety, unable to shake the thoughts of Mike and what he had done. It wasn't just the affair that hurt, it was the complete betrayal. I had trusted him with everything, and he had shattered that trust in the most painful way imaginable. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, questioning if I would ever be able to forgive him, or if I even wanted to. I kept to myself for the most part. I moved to a small town about 2 hours away from the city, a place where no one knew me, where I could breathe without the weight of Mike's lies pressing down on me. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I got a job at a local bookstore, something simple, something that kept me busy. And slowly, I began to find peace in the routine, in the quiet moments where I could forget about the past. But the past didn't forget me. It was one cold autumn afternoon when I got the letter. It was thick, formal-looking, with my name typed neatly across the front. I knew who it was from the moment I saw it. I didn't have to open it to know what it was: Mike, reaching out again. I tore it open before I even realized what I was doing. The letter was an apology. A long, drawn-out explanation of how he had changed, how he had realized the gravity of his mistakes. He spoke of regret, of wanting to make things right. He wrote that he missed me, that he still loved me, and that he wanted to see me, wanted to apologize in person. At first, I felt a wave of anger. How dare he? After everything he had put me through, how could he just waltz back into my life, asking for forgiveness like it was that simple? But then, a part of me, just a tiny part, felt something else. It was a flicker, something buried deep inside me. I remembered the man I had fallen in love with, the man I had thought would be my forever. I hated myself for it, but I felt conflicted. Maybe, just maybe, I was ready to hear him out. I needed closure, if nothing else. I agreed to meet him. We arranged to meet at the same cafe where we'd spent so many afternoons together in the past. The place hadn't changed much, the same familiar smells and cozy atmosphere. I walked in, my heart pounding, my hands cold and clammy. And there he was, sitting in a corner booth, looking exactly the same and yet completely different. Mike looked up when I walked in, and for a moment, I saw the flicker of hope in his eyes. He stood up as I approached, a nervous smile spreading across his face. "Anna," he said softly. "It's so good to see you." I didn't know how to respond. So I just sat down across from him and waited. "I've missed you," Mike said, his voice trembling. "I know I don't deserve it, but I've been trying to figure things out. I've been seeing a therapist, trying to get my life together. I know I ruined everything, and I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." I listened, but I didn't feel anything. Not the way I thought I would. It was as if his words were floating over me, not quite reaching my heart. I had heard it all before, the apologies, the promises. They meant nothing now. Mike, I said, my voice steady, but cold. I don't know what you want from me. I don't know what you expect, but I'm not the same person I was when I left. You took something from me that I can't get back. You betrayed me in ways I can't even put into words. And I don't think I'll ever be able to forgive you for that. His face fell, the regret and sorrow on his face evident. He opened his mouth to say something, but I stopped him. You don't get to come back into my life after all of this, I continued, my voice gaining strength. I've worked too hard to rebuild myself, to trust myself again. I'm not interested in starting over with you. I'm not interested in being part of your second chance. Because you don't deserve it. Mike looked like he had been punched in the stomach. The color drained from his face, and he sat back in his chair, silent for a long moment. His eyes were filled with tears, but I didn't feel sorry for him. I couldn't. I'm sorry, Anna, he whispered finally. I never meant to hurt you. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I had said everything I needed to say. The rest of the conversation was a blur. He asked if we could still be friends, if we could at least stay in touch. I told him I wasn't interested in that either. There was nothing left between us, no friendship to salvage, no future to speak of. When I left the cafe that day, I felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted from my chest. It didn't change the pain, the betrayal, but it gave me something I hadn't realized I needed, closure. And so, I walked away from Mike for the last time. I didn't look back. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be days when I'd remember the good times, the love we shared, and the life we had built. But I knew now, more than ever, that I was stronger than my past. And I would keep moving forward, on my own terms, with or without Mike in my life. Because I had learned the hard way that sometimes, in order to heal, you have to let go completely. The weeks after my meeting with Mike were a blur. I'd thought that the conversation would bring me a sense of finality, but instead, it left me feeling strangely empty. I had made peace with what happened, but something still lingered. Maybe it was the hollow ache of loss, or maybe it was the realization that I had spent so much of my life wrapped up in someone else's story that I had forgotten to live my own. But life, it seemed, had a way of pushing you forward, whether you were ready or not. One evening, a couple of months after that meeting with Mike, I was sitting in my apartment, scrolling through my phone. The days had become more predictable: work, quiet evenings, a few phone calls with old friends, and long walks in the park. I wasn't happy, not yet, but I was content in a way I hadn't been in years. Then I saw it. A message from an unfamiliar number. I hesitated before opening it. I didn't recognize the area code, but it had to be important. My fingers hovered over the screen before I finally tapped it open. Anna, I don't know if you remember me, but I'm Sarah. I used to work with Mike. He mentioned you a few times. I've been trying to reach you for a while now. There's something you need to know. My heart skipped. My mind raced. It took everything in me not to panic. I stared at the message for a long time, my mind going 100 different directions. What could Sarah want? I barely knew the woman. She was just someone Mike had worked with, someone I had met once or twice at company parties. But her words felt urgent, almost desperate. I typed back. What is it? The reply came quickly. I think you need to know what happened between Mike and me, Sarah wrote. And I think you deserve to hear the truth from someone who was there. My stomach churned. 100 possibilities ran through my mind, each worse than the last. Was this another apology from Mike? Was it a confession? Or something darker? I took a deep breath and, despite my better judgment, agreed to meet her. We met at a small cafe on the outskirts of town a few days later. Sarah was younger than me, maybe in her late 20s, with wide eyes that seemed to carry an overwhelming weight. She looked nervous, almost as if she expected me to storm out before she could even speak. When she saw me, she waved me over, and I joined her at the table, unsure of what to expect. "Thank you for meeting with me," she said softly, not looking me in the eye. "I wasn't sure you would." I shrugged. "What's this about, Sarah?" She hesitated for a moment, then looked up at me, her face serious. Mike wasn't just having an affair. It wasn't just that. I don't know how to say this, but he's been hiding something much worse. Something that could have destroyed both of you. I felt my throat tighten. "What are you talking about?" Sarah took a deep breath, clearly struggling to find the right words. "Mike wasn't just emotionally distant, Anna. He's been involved in some illegal things for months, things that have nothing to do with his work. I don't know the full extent of it, but I know enough to tell you that his business trips were a cover for something far darker than you realize. Something dangerous." I sat back in my chair, completely stunned. "Are you saying Mike was involved in criminal activity?" Sarah nodded. "I don't know the details, but I do know he was meeting people, dangerous people, while he was away. I overheard a conversation once. Mike was part of something bigger than I ever could have imagined. I don't think he knew how deep it went. But he was in over his head." The weight of her words hit me like a brick wall. Mike, the man I had married, the man who had lied to me about an affair, was involved in something illegal? My mind raced, trying to process everything she had said. "I thought you should know," Sarah continued, her voice quiet but urgent. "Because I'm worried. I'm worried he's gotten himself into something that could hurt you, Anna. And I don't think he's been honest with you about everything." I was silent for a long time, my thoughts tangled in a web of confusion and disbelief. But one thing was clear, I couldn't ignore what Sarah had said. There was more to Mike's lies than just infidelity, and now my safety, and the safety of everything I had worked for, was at risk. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept running over Sarah's words in my mind, trying to make sense of them. Mike was always so careful, so meticulous about his lies. Could it really be true? Was he involved in something that could destroy both our lives? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had to find out the truth. I couldn't just walk away from this again. If Mike was in trouble, if his actions were putting me and my future at risk, I needed to face it head on. I needed to protect myself. The next morning, I drove to his old apartment. The one he had kept after we got married, just in case. It was the place where he had stayed during his business trips. I had never dared to go there before, not after everything had fallen apart. But today, it felt like the only choice I had. I rang the doorbell. No answer. I tried the doorknob. It was unlocked. Stepping inside, I felt a wave of dread wash over me. I was about to uncover more than I ever wanted to know. And once I did, there would be no turning back. As I stepped through the door of Mike's old apartment, the air felt heavier than I remembered. The place hadn't changed much, just as sterile and impersonal as it had always been. The familiar scent of old furniture and stale air greeted me, but today, everything seemed to suffocate me. My heart hammered in my chest, and a part of me was afraid of what I would find. I walked through the small hallway, my footsteps muffled by the carpet. The living room was as bare as ever, except for a few scattered papers on the coffee table. I scanned the room quickly, my eyes catching a glimpse of something out of place, an envelope, tucked under a pile of old magazines. Without thinking, I reached for it. The envelope was thick, sealed, and addressed to Mike. The name on the return address wasn't one I recognized, but the handwriting, tight, professional, sent a shiver down my spine. I ripped it open, my hands trembling, and pulled out a letter. It wasn't from a company. It was a personal note, written in cold, clinical language. It detailed transactions, numbers, names I didn't recognize. But the most shocking part was the mention of goods being delivered across state lines. A few lines down, there was a reference to smuggling. My stomach turned. This was far beyond anything I could have imagined. Mike had been involved in something much worse than I thought, something illegal. This wasn't just about the affair. This wasn't just about betrayal. This was a whole new level of danger. My pulse raced as I scanned the rest of the letter. It was clear that Mike had gotten involved with people who weren't just criminals, they were dangerous, and they wouldn't hesitate to silence anyone who got in their way. I realized with a sickening jolt that I wasn't just in emotional danger anymore. I was at risk, we were all at risk. I quickly shoved the letter back into the envelope and stuffed it in my bag. There was no time to waste. I couldn't confront Mike, not yet. I needed to make sure I was safe, that my family was safe. The weight of the information felt like a ton pressing down on me, but I knew what I had to do. I had to get away from him, for good. There was no more room for forgiveness. No more chance for reconciliation. As I turned to leave, the door creaked open behind me. I spun around, my heart dropping. Standing in the doorway was Mike. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear as he saw the panic in mine. For a moment, we just stood there, silent, the distance between us suddenly infinite. He took a step toward me, his voice breaking. "Anna, wait. Please. I can explain. I never wanted you to find out like this." I swallowed hard, my voice shaking with the weight of everything I had learned. "You never wanted me to find out, Mike. But I already know. I know everything. And now I'm going to protect myself from you. From whatever you've gotten into." His eyes filled with tears, and he took another step forward, reaching out for me. "Anna, I swear, I never wanted this for you. I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix this. But I already knew. There was no fixing it." "Mike," I said, my voice steady, cold. "You've broken me in ways I didn't think were possible. But this is the end. For both of us. Whatever this is, whatever you've gotten yourself into, it's not something I can be part of. I'm done. I'm done with you." For the first time, I saw the full extent of his panic. "You don't understand. If you walk away now, it won't just end like this. There are people who won't let you leave." I felt my breath catch in my throat. The implications of his words hit me like a punch. He wasn't just threatening me emotionally anymore, he was threatening my life. But I couldn't let fear control me. I'd already survived so much. I had to keep moving forward, no matter the cost. With a final glance at him, I turned and walked out of that apartment, leaving the past and Mike behind me for good. The following days were a whirlwind. I took everything I had learned to the authorities. The more I shared with them, the more I realized how deep Mike's involvement went. He wasn't just tangled in something dangerous, he was a key player in a criminal network. By the time the investigation was over, Mike had disappeared. They never found him, and I didn't care to know where he had gone. It didn't matter anymore. For the first time in months, I felt the weight of the past lift off my shoulders. I wasn't free yet, there were still things to work through, still wounds to heal, but I had taken control. I had made the choice to leave behind the man who had betrayed me, to stop letting his lies define me. And in doing so, I had reclaimed my life. In the end, it wasn't the affair that broke me. It wasn't the lies or the betrayal. It was the realization that I had given away so much of myself, that I had ignored the warning signs for so long. But now I knew what mattered. Now, I knew I was enough. And I would never, ever let someone take that from me again.
If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, I'd really appreciate it if you took a moment to click that button. I put a lot of effort into searching through Reddit so you can enjoy the stories I found just for you. You already know what to do. Comment what you think about this story. I'll respond to you. See you in the next video.